Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Osamu. I am a second-year Master's in City Planning student here in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, and the teaching assistant for our class this semester, Indigenous Environmental Planning. We're going to introduce our speakers in just one moment, but I just wanted to give a quick background on the class. This is the first time we've offered this course at DUSP. We meet every Thursday morning. We have some great undergraduate and graduate students. And as part of the class, we've had this speaker series that we're doing every week with support from the Environmental Policy and Planning group at DUSP. Our faculty are Larry Susskind and Janelle Knox-Hayes from MIT DUSP, as well as Elizabeth Rule from George Washington University. This is our course. Hello? Hi, you're on now. I'm just going to mute you if that's okay. Okay. This is our course statement. So we ask, what environmental challenges do contemporary Indigenous nations face? What are the historical roots of these challenges? And how can planning by, with, and for Indigenous peoples address these challenges? We've been really blessed to have some MIT Solve Indigenous Communities Fellows participating in the course. Dr. Ku Kahakoau and Eva Dawn Burke, as well as Dr. Elizabeth Rule. And we also have Leslie Jonas from the Native Land Conservancy. So students have been working with these three clients to do projects for the whole semester. I've also been having these seminars and conversations with guest speakers like our speakers today. I'll just quickly read our land acknowledgement. The teaching team acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land which MIT occupies is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation and Massachusetts peoples. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of these territories, as well as the ongoing processes of colonialism and dispossession in which we and our institution are implicated. Beyond the stolen territory which we physically occupy, MIT has long profited from the sale of federal lands granted by the Morrill Act, territories stolen from 82 tribes, including the Greater and Little Osage, Chippewa, and Omaha peoples. As we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land from time immemorial, we seek to indigenize our institution in the field of planning, offer space, and leave Indigenous peoples in more empowered positions. Great, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janelle to introduce our speakers today.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm Janelle Knox-Hayes, as Osamu mentioned, one of the instructors of the course, and very pleased to have this panel of practitioners and experts on Indigenous planning with us today. So we have three speakers in no particular order, beginning with Mr. Kāʻeo Duarte, who is the Vice President of Community and AINA Resiliency at Kamehameha Schools. Under his leadership, the Community and AINA Resiliency Group's responsibility is to balance educational, cultural, environmental, community, and economic returns through stewardship and management of 360,000 acres of, and apologies, I'm probably mispronouncing this, but AINA Pauhi KS land holdings on 5 islands. Mr. Duarte has held multiple positions since joining the Kamehameha in 2004. Prior to being named VP, he served as Water Resources Manager, Regional Asset Manager, and West Hawaii Regional Director, where he oversaw KS initiatives to unify and elevate people, programs, and land assets for greater community impact. So welcome. Next, we have Mr. John David Toby, JD, who is AICP registered and an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation near Pendleton, Oregon. Mr. Toby is a proud Cayuse and Joseph Van Ness Pierce. He has more than 17 years of professional experience in large-scale development projects, from conceptualization, design, development, permitting, and construction. For the last 7 years, he's served as the CTUIR Tribal Planning Director, overseeing and monitoring the tribe's comprehensive plan and administering the Tribal Land Development Code, Building Code, and Environmental Health Safety Code. So welcome, a pleasure to have you with us. And finally, we have Mr. George Chucky Green, from the Wampanoag tribe. He's the program manager to the Santuit River Habitat Research Project. He has almost 30 years of conservation and environmental management experience. Before he served as the assistant director of the Natural Resource Department of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe from 2008 to 2017, and then taking on his current role as the department director. In his position, Chucky ensures that the tribe remains a steward of their ancestral lands through environmental conservation and protection programs. He's won multiple grants for the department that seek to preserve the tribe's natural resources, while also running the Native Youth and Science Preserving Our Homelands program. Chucky Green applied for and received an EPA Healthy Communities grant to expand nitrogen reduction and shoreline protection from erosion within Oyster Reef. He currently consults on a variety of environmental projects. So thank you so much for our three speakers for joining us. I'm going to turn the screen over to you, and I think each of you have slides to share. So we'll start with Chucky. And as Osamu noted, if you have questions, please do leave them in the chat. It's a great place for us to keep track of questions, and then we'll come back and answer these in a discussion session at the end. All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As she said, I'm George Chucky Green from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. I have enjoyed working with my tribe as the Director of Natural Resources, from which I have now retired. We have several projects that we have done that have proved to be pretty incredible as far as their value to the community as well as the tribe. Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, we are on our Aboriginal lands. We have a small group of people that actually live here on the tribal lands, a little over 700. We have found that working with the community to resolve the issues of the community has worked for us. But without TEK, that would have been impossible to do. The tribal knowledge that we have here is because we have been here from time immemorial. We have been on this land. We have seen this land change. We have seen sea level rise go from 125 meters below where it is now to its current height. So we were at George's Banks, about 250 miles offshore, when we started monitoring the situations that were happening to our world. As in the document, the Popponesset Bay Restoration Project was a project that I helped develop along with Toby and Anton Perry, who are two tribal members that work side by side with us to try and fix a problem. In 2005, we had a fish kill. First time ever any of us saw a striped bass laying all over the bank and not being able to survive without the oxygen that they needed to live. We found that we had a nutrient loading problem that was developing within the Mashpee River and the Popponesset Bay system. So we started looking at the issue from a tribal perspective. So we first looked at the river itself and the Mashpee Wakeby Lake that contributes to the river, and then Popponesset Bay. What the conclusions that we drew from that, and I mean, this is in conjunction with Dr. Brian Howes out of UMass Dartmouth and the Mashpee Water Quality Collaborative, which is a joint venture between the tribe, the town, and UMass Dartmouth to establish our TMDLs and also to look at where the problem could be addressed and how it could be addressed. Well, we looked at first the pond, and the contributions to the pond were significant because of current development. So we were getting a lot of nutrient load coming out of the pond. But we said, okay, how do we get the best bang for our buck? So we looked down the river. Now, the river is fairly pristine because of so much water, except for in the summers when the population on both sides of the river grow to enormous proportion. So then we looked at the bay. We talked with Dr. Michael Rice from URI, Dr. Dale Levitt from Roger Williams, and Dr. Howes. In discussions with them, we found that any contributions that were coming out of the pond were 36 years before they hit the bay. So any actions that we took at the pond, we wouldn't be able to see it and we wouldn't be able to show. So we moved into the river, and those were also too long-term to be able to convince the community that what we were doing is practical and able to be completed. So we turned to the bay. Understanding from TEK that filter feeders clean the water, we decided to look into, for the project, oyster propagation. The department applied for a tribal wildlife grant to establish an oyster farm. Through our consultation with our collegiate partners, we kind of determined that around 2 million oysters would bring us to almost 90% of the TMDL that we needed to achieve to fix the bay. That would not fix the other problems, but it would fix the bay, and that would fix the bay, and then we'd be able to demonstrate something that could actually be demonstrated and proved. We received funding through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Tribal Wildlife Grant Program, and we established the First Light shellfish. And through First Light, we were able to demonstrate that we could reduce the amount of nutrients in the bay, not to a point of complete cleanup, but to a point that we could at least show that we were holding the line, that we were no longer deteriorating, that we could maintain the current levels of pollution that we were looking at. After 2005 fish kill, with the implementation of the TWG in 2009, we were able to show that we reduced the level of nutrients in the bay. We never again saw a fish kill. We were able to, the oysters, they were in a great place because the food was abundant and they did their part to clean up. Oysters can filter up to 8 gallons an hour of water, and by them being able to take the nutrients out of the water, we were able to at least hold the line on where they would be damaging the environment. Well, in establishing the shellfish farm, we talked to Dr. Dale Levitt, and he helped us. He taught us how to build the containment structures for the oysters so that we could grow from seed. We put in our first 200,000 seed in 2009. In 2012, 2012, we received the Environmental Merit Award from the EPA for showing that we could reduce nutrients with shellfish. So this was a big thing in how we moved forward. We knew that we couldn't do 2 million all at once, which was our goal at the end of the day, because we knew at 2 million we were going to hit that 90%. So we started growing fish with 200,000. We grew our first 200,000 out, and in 2010 we were ready to sell fish for the first time and reinvest them funds into the project and make the project come close to self-sustaining. It wasn't yet, but we were able to generate enough income to keep the project going. After that, I applied for a grant, a Healthy Communities grant from EPA, to increase the number of filter feeders, to also protect the shorelines, because climate change has shown us that our winter storms are coming in and cleaning the marsh off. So we figured, okay, oysters worked the first time, let's try them again. So we established an oyster reef on a part of Shoestring Bay, which is a tributary to Popponesset Bay. We had some great success there of buffering the bank so that the bank wasn't being chewed up by the waves. Climate change brought in winter storms that were actually attacking from a different direction for winter when the marshes were dead. So the marshes were getting chewed up because they didn't have the root sustaining power to hold them. So that gave us more oysters, and more oysters meant more reduction. Next project was to share this and teach it to our children. In 2012, we established the Native Youth in Science Preserving Our Homelands. This project was so that we could teach children, first of all, because when we looked around at our community, and our kids were no longer in the woods. They were on their computers, they were on their devices, they were not getting out into the ground. So we established Native Youth in Science, Preserving Our Homelands. And we did something that a lot of people told us was not doable, but we found out that scientists were more receptive than any of our people had expected them to be. We are here on Cape Cod, so we had an abundance of people to help support us going forward. So we created a crossover between TEK and conventional science. We met with the scientists out of Woods Hole and local scientists that were around USGS, NOAA, and we sat down together and we said, okay, let's do this in a way that we can teach tribal kids. And first of all, we have to teach each other so that we do not violate each other's space as such, but that we can share the knowledge between us and our children. Native Youth in Science has run now for 9 years, and that doesn't count last year. I mean, it's last year we kind of got beat up. We got driven back indoors again. I am so looking forward to participating in Native Youth in Science this year. But what we have done is we've worked with the scientists. We have created a culture between the scientists, the tribal culture keepers, which I am so proud to be one of, and our children we have children that have returned that have gone on to be scientists themselves, and that have also learned about going into the woods and picking berries and picking plants and finding what you can eat and what you can survive on. So it's done multiple things. And plus we've been able to teach them the science of pollution and nutrient reductions, and also fire. Fire is another TEK piece that I've been pushing hard, because we have a lot of our plants that are important to the tribe that they need fire. They are fire dependent and they need fire to keep going forward. So that's been another part of TEK that's been very important to me. And so all my guys are fire trained, and we know how to work with it. It's been challenging at times to cross the line, to say, okay, this is good, this works. And by working with the scientists, we've been able to show things like geology. Our oral history tells us that we started out at George's Banks. That George's Banks, which now everybody knows is one of the greatest fisheries in the world, was once above the water. So what we've done is we brought in the geologists to show us a geological record. The geological record shows that, okay, there was this great big huge glacier that sat on top of Cape Cod and the islands. And from a tribal perspective, along that same time period, we had Masha, the giant. Now, consider yourself a Wampanoag person. You're out at George's Banks, you're on dry land, and you're looking at all these hills and valleys that go over to, then there's a 900-foot stack of ice. Now, you've got to figure a way to convey this so that it goes along as a story. So that story is repeated generation after generation after generation. Well, the story of Marshall did that. And I mean, it showed the giant that created Cape and Islands, that protected the Indians, that set up a place for us to be on the ground as the water came up around us. So that was a way that the kids, and we found that the kids grasp those concepts that they didn't understand before because of the way we put it across. Here you go. This is this side. This is this side. We bring them together and it works. So, I mean, I'm very, very proud of where POH has come and how TEK is an important part of. Everything we do, we try to incorporate the tribal perspective. And we do have a film out on our first year of the project, and you can find it on YouTube. Native Youth and Science, Preserving Our Homelands. And that film was from the very first year, and it kind of gives you a perspective, even though we have grown the program so much that we are looking to redo the film this year, since funding has become more available because other agencies want to get involved. And so we have had good luck in moving it forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chucky. And I put a link to that film in the chat so that everybody can see that, but really tremendous and inspiring work, both the conservation projects. And I think I posted some links. We can post some additional links for the audience about those projects. Really wonderful to see the restorative principles and their connection to weaving traditional ecological knowledge, and then also STEM disciplines. And so inspiring as well to learn about the youth work that you're doing So thank you so much. I'm going to pass the floor over to Mr. Duarte to tell us a little bit about his case study in Hawaii, and we'll work through each of the speakers' presentations and then open it up for discussion and questions. So if you do have questions, please use the chat. It's a really nice way to keep track of people's thoughts. Kāʻeo, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Morning, everyone. I'm sorry, it's 4:30 in the morning here, and 5 o'clock in the morning here in Hawaii. So I'm going to blame that if I can't get this going. And thanks, Chucky, for your presentation. Actually, when I was out there 20 plus years ago, we actually visited some of your tribal lands and interacted with some of your tribe 20 years ago. I can't remember their names, but we had some great time sharing stories and building relationships with your people over there. Let me try and share my screen. Can you folks see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to start. I mean, when I was invited to come here, and the title was Traditional Ecological Knowledge. It's actually a good exercise for me to. I was trying to think, how do I convey how I process this? So what I wanted to do first, if it's okay, is in my simplistic way, and this is it's just Kāʻeo's version of how do I process knowledge, or how do I look at it. And Ku, I believe, is on the phone, may process it differently, though, from similar directions. I believe so. I want to give it a shot. It's the first time I'm trying and convey how I look at my connections across knowledge systems, if you will. So starting here with Aina, which is a land for a word for land, but also means that which feeds, that which nourishes you, as kind of essential to knowledge systems. And if, of course, you've heard the word aloha, but kind of combined with Aina, aloha Aina, kind of love of land, patriotism to land, loyalty to land, and those kinds of senses. And you also hear words like malamaina, to care, to cherish for land. And you also, malamaina often will be like our malamaina department basically is our natural resource department. So basically, natural resource, basically the care and love and cherishing of land. So when people have asked me about, well, how do you acquire traditional knowledge? And again, for me, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in what we call ike kupuna. So ike is a word for knowledge, or learning, and kupuna is elder. So learning of elders or knowledge over time. And another key point here is genealogy or connections, which is mokuauhau, which is our connection. So I would argue that the relationships in our DNA, both going back, as Chucky mentioned, over many, many times, relationships to each other, two-legged, but also relationships to place and our extended family in the streams, in the forest, in the ocean, and so forth. And that genealogical connection, in fact, our genealogy, ourself connecting us to place, making place our family, is important, because you care for things, right? You tend to take care of and have a viewpoint of caring for that which is around you, if you consider it family, and something that you must care for and cherish, and a sense of time going back many generations and going many generations forward. So I would kind of lay as a foundation of elder knowledge or traditional knowledge, or TEK, being rooted both in a genealogy connecting to place and human and otherwise. And then, talk about, when I talk to kids sometimes about ike, well, how do you get ike kupuna? And there's no one answer that. Well, again, looking to wise sayings like this one, makahanaka ike, means, knowledge comes by the doing of things, so not just learning for the sake of learning, but the acquisition of knowledge through action, through the doing of things. So you must do to learn, fail, succeed, and over many generations, acquire that ike. Again, you see that word ike in here, through the doing of things. But just doing and acquiring knowledge is really not enough. It has to be for a reason, for responsibility, tying back to that relationship. So how do you acquire knowledge over time through the doing of things with a reason and with values and integrity? So again, Ike and Pono means balance, being in balance with each other, with that which is around you. So how do you, again, rooted in place in who you are, in your genealogical connections with the Ike kupuna that you do have, how do you do yourself? Take action, learn with responsibility, with values and integrity. And hopefully, if you do that over and over again, you gain some wisdom. At least that's my hope. My hope is on my journey. I've done some things right, I've done some things wrong, but my hope is over time, if I keep doing with values, with integrity, taking action, then hopefully I'll gain just a little bit of wisdom on my journey. And then, then over time, we add to and contribute to the body of knowledge. And I also like to say, now we're using words like sustainability, and I think for me at least, Aina really is literally at the central. Aloha Aina, Malama Aina, and the manifestation of that is how I at least approach sustainability, traditional ecological knowledge, and those kinds of concepts going forward. So anyway, I hope my little cartoon here is somewhat helpful in understanding how I process traditional ecological knowledge on my journey, both as a Hawaiian and as a scientist per se, or be trained in Western science at MIT and so forth. So with that, I wanted to give you a kind of zooming out first of my kuleana, my responsibility. I work for Kamehameha Schools, which is a large Native Hawaiian trust founded by the great granddaughter of Kamehameha, who needed our islands. And again, I talked about genealogy and mokuahau, and she received her lands from her family, who are chiefs of, again, the Kamehameha line across the state. And just fast forwarding to today, here we are over 130 years later. She left everything she had to Native Hawaiian children and community. And my job is to just contribute on my watch, to do my best to honor both the lands that we directly have kuleana responsibility for, but also in concert with our communities and our lahui, our Hawaiian people statewide on these islands and communities. What I wanted to do is just kind of walk through. I chose an area down the road for where I'm at. I'm here in Kona, Hololoa, Kona on Hawaii Island, and I'm about 10-15 minutes down the road is a place called Kapulehu. And I chose this because maybe it doesn't quite fit some of your guys' images of what Hawaii looks like. And it also highlights some of the challenges and tensions that we work with as we're managing these traditional lands in this 21st century with so much different forces, political, economic, and community changes in Hawaii. So as we approach as an institution around trying to how do we find impact and blended returns or uses across our aina around education, around community, culture, economics, and environmental returns, and how do we apply them? And each place is different. Each side of each island, and each island can be very different. But we don't necessarily have many tribes here in Hawaii as one nation, but also definitely nuances of in our different places across the islands and vastly different environments. So Kapulehu actually is a really dry area on the west side of Hawaii Island. Here, just showing you some faces of elders of this place. Because it is a dry area, it didn't necessarily sustain a large population, but definitely a very hardy and resilient population of our people from the mountain to the ocean. So Kapulehu is this land area from the very top of this mountain here, Walalai, that I live on down to the ocean. And again, it comes from Hawaii, from her Ohana Kamehameha V. So kind of talking about the tension. So I'm not going to go into the long story of the journey of Kapulehu from those images of our elders, but today on the ocean side of it is some of the most expensive real estate in America, where people like Bill Gates and owners of Walmart and so forth have their second homes and come vacation on these places. So how do we deal with tensions of what has become extremely extensive real estate that we don't see our people in, and how do we manage our environment, our cultural resources and natural resources in that context? It starts partly with, as Chucky was talking about, education of places like this that we've embedded in agreements here to learn about places where we produce salt and our traditional sites near the ocean, and working with lineal descendants and elders of that place, and the next generation to teach, and just creating places to convene. It's not perfect, it's a journey. Above that resort, we have what is the largest remnant of native Hawaiian dryland forest in the state, well, therefore the world. These are plants that you've probably never seen before, and unfortunately, you don't see very often anywhere in the state anymore. Hawaii has the unfortunate distinction of being the extinction capital of the world. Here we see a number of acres of some very rare endemic dryland forests that remained after the 1800s, where there was tremendous deforestation for coal and the ships that were coming through Hawaii in the Pacific, and progress we're making in trying to restore and grow that native dryland forest with our community. And with our kids, exactly as Chucky mentioned, is critical of, again, Ike. How do we learn with our kids, learn from our kids, in and with and touching and feeling and seeing these places and species that have been impacted so greatly over the last couple hundred years since contact with the outside world. So that's a key part of working with our community to do that. Again, important part there too is you get two outcomes, right? You're helping to care for the aina to malama aina, as I mentioned, and educating at the same time. So being able to get those multiple outcomes at once and growing the next generation of leaders is critical. With natural and cultural resources, from our offshore resources to our other kinds of resources, like these traditional salt pans where we would produce salt, which is critical for drying and so many aspects of our native cuisine. And we've had some great efforts in preservation, difficult conversations with state and government agencies on our marine restoration and our traditional ecological knowledge keepers there. Tense, lively debates on trying to close and allow the fisheries to rest, our kapu, as we would say here, but with some great success and rebounding of many of these species. And I'll show you some numbers here in a second. So here in this bottom corner here, as we had this, we call it the tri-weight effort there, to stop a lot of the kind of impacts on some of our native fishes there. And you can see the rebound, how much it's worked, and integrating with the lineal descendants there. In a relatively short amount of time, the 10-year rest period is not over, and we've already seen some pretty significant double-digit rebounding in some of our key fish species in that area. And you can get some sense of some of our learners and how we're trying to have the homeowners and others there contribute back into natural and cultural resources, renewable energy projects, trying to reposition former ranches for sustainable food production. So how do we look at a whole ecosystem similar to the way our elders did, our kupuna did, but in a different context? And how do we take those same values forward to now and try and balance our financial returns without sacrificing place? And how do we undo some things that need to be undone to get back to a place that honors, again, looking back toward our ancestors, but looking forward to making sure those generations to come will know these places and be able to feel, taste, and smell a place like Kapulahu. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kāʻeo. It's really inspiring to see this work and also understand the tensions that exist with the other land uses and the settler kinds of mentalities around use of the landscape. And so how to make education effective, both for Native and non-Native communities. So really inspiring to see the work that you're doing. Thank you. We'll turn it over to JD Toby. Let's see if you're wonderful, if you're on the line and if you want to share your slides. Thank you so much. And we should still have time at the end for a nice discussion.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you see what's on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just a quick overview. I'm JD Tovey. A little background on me. I'm the planning director here at the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Pendleton, Oregon. We're just about 3-4 hours east of Portland, about halfway between Portland and Boise. This is a little background on me. I can come back to it later. But most of my education right now, I'm still working on my PhD at the University of Washington. It got held up for it's been way too long. I started it way back in 2009, and I took some time off to come back to work, and then I went back in 2019 to finish it, and we had 500-year floods here at the reservation, so I had to come back to be on incident command team for that. And then COVID happened, and so now it's yet another year, and I'm still working on it. So sure. A little background. So this presentation is kind of an adaptation of a presentation I've done many times. It's just kind of like travel planning 101, and get into more specific on how we operate here at Umatilla. For the most part, we operate in the Pacific Northwest and, so Washington, Idaho, and Oregon areas. And right here in the middle is where Umatilla Indian Reservation is, about halfway between Portland and Boise. Generally, there's two major cultural groups. If you're from the Pacific Northwest, you know that that's way simplified. But there's two basic larger cultural groups, the Coast Salish and the Plateaus of Hopton. And the Plateaus of Hopton is mostly throughout here. And there's all kinds of offshoots and kind of implications of that. Like you see the size of the reservations. This is actually the Cascade Range. So you can see the size of the reservations on either side of the Cascade Range. There's a difference. There are a lot of geopolitical reasons for that that I don't necessarily get into today, but that's where we're at. And so this next series of maps is kind of like our little history on what's going on with our landscape. This is our traditional use landscape for the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes. The traditional use means this is lands that we regularly visited. We would, for trade, to go for hunting, we'd go over to Montana for buffalo, we go down to Nevada to trade for salt and other goods. We go to the coast to trade for, seafood and other things like that. So this is all the areas that we would actually traditionally go to. And then you see kind of like the darker area here in the middle. And then these next series of maps will be kind of like starting with this, and we'll kind of go down to where we are today. So that darker area is this, which is the Aboriginal tidal lands. And so these are the lands that the tribes actually defended and inhabited. So the Cayuse were mostly up here in the highlands. This is the Blue Mountains. The Walla Walla were mostly up here in the north, and Umatilla were down here along the river. And so this is the Columbia River that we call Nsiwana. It means big river or big water. So this is our Aboriginal tidal lands that we, like I said, we defended. If you come onto our lands, you either needed to have permission or we'd probably run you off. The Oregon Trail, just for a little context, this is I-84, which roughly follows the Oregon Trail. So the Oregon Trail went right through the middle of our territory. In 1855, we had a reservation just kind of negotiated at the council at Walla Walla. So this is the described reservation boundary, which is about 8% of the total 6.5 million acres that we held in Aboriginal title. Zooming in on that, so that's our described boundary out of 1855. This is what was surveyed in 1871, and then they found out that they accidentally built Pendleton on the reservation, so U.S. Congress had to notch out a little piece on there, so the Pendleton wasn't within the reservation in 1882. And then everything went from following, like natural lines. Like this is a river, this is Wild Horse Creek, and then this is the kind of the ridge line. This is another creek and ridge lines down here. And so then we had the township range system come out and Dawes Act and all the allotments and everything like that. So everything became square. So they knocked the reservation down in 1888 to the diminished reservation. This lands that were down here in the south that they took back, these were lands that were all auctioned off, but nobody wanted to buy these lands. They're all kind of high remote lands up in the forest. So in about 1940, they were so generous as to give them back to us. And then trust lands. So within the reservation, a lot of the lands within the reservation were then also auctioned off. So these are fee lands. The gray lands are fee lands within the reservation. Now, fee land is just like any other land. It's land that you pay taxes on. So most planning areas deal with one kind of land, which is fee. It means it's just normal land that you pay taxes on. On our reservation, we actually have 4 different types of land. We have fee land, trust land, which is tribal trust land, which held by the federal government in U.S. in trust. We have allotment land, which is land held by individual Indians that are held in tribal trust or in trust. And then we have tribally owned fee lands, which are fee lands that we've bought that have not been converted to trust, but they're still technically fee. Each one of those has different federal regulations and has different applications to state law. So it keeps it very busy here because, trying to plan across a checkerboard like this becomes quite difficult. So this is our trust land ownership. This is in 2015. So these are the 4 different types. So non-Indian fee is the yellow, tribal fee, which is the orange, and then tribal trust, which is the blue. And we kind of lump the allotments and the tribal trust into one grouping. Otherwise, the map just gets really kind of crazy. So these are lands, a lot of the lands we've started acquiring back. So zooming back out a little bit, these are additional lands within our ceded territories that we've bought. So we have Wanakit, Rainwater, Frenchtown, and there's actually a number of other ones that I'll get to that are not actually on this map yet. So the jurisdiction, all lands within the reservation and off-reservation trust lands, so we have jurisdiction under trust law on administrations for land use and everything else like that. But it becomes complicated. So these are the 3, the different types. So tribal trust, tribal fee, and non-Indian fee lands. Like as I said, each one of these has different CFRs, federal law, and it's state law application and things like that. So so we have a lot of agreements with our local jurisdictions, our states, and with feds on how we actually manage these lands across this jurisdictional quagmire. The first thing we have is an MOU with Umatilla County. So I'll get into a little bit more, and I'll go over real briefly. There is a court case called Brendell V Yakima, and Brendell V Yakima basically said that tribes do not have jurisdiction over fee lands within the reservation. Those fee lands within the reservation are under the jurisdiction of the state. So technically, all these light yellow lands are technically state jurisdiction because they're non-Indian owned lands. We have an agreement with the Umatilla County. So, us planning across a checkerboard with 3 or 4 different jurisdictions just becomes very difficult. And so we have an MOU with the county because it's also difficult for the county. So our MOU basically says that they understand and recognize our interest in the lands. And then we're a sub-planning area for the county on fee lands within the reservation. And then any actions that occur on these fee lands about quarterly, if somebody has a house improvement or something like that, then we report that over to the county quarterly or annually whenever they need it. And mostly that's for taxation and for appraisals on property appraisals or assessments, sorry. So yeah, Brendell V Yakima, that is a whole semester of lectures on Brendell V Yakima, if anyone's ever so interested on some complex Indian law. One thing that's really interesting about Indian law is, you know, a lot of, I don't want to say all, but most non-Indian fee land land law is actually fairly settled. It's fairly settled law, but every single day we work on projects within the federal realm that is not necessarily settled law. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that are going on within Indian country concerning Indian land law. So it's kind of a fascinating place. You know, and even here and within our office, you know, we'll be working on a decision and we actually have to think about, you know, how is this impacted by federal law, or what is the implication? You know, there are things that we do, you know, that are not completely settled that potentially have a path all the way to the Supreme Court. We don't necessarily want to do that yet, but on some things we might. Again, jurisdiction, so the 87 DUSP Act, known as the General Allotment Act, that's where they took the reservation. It was mutually held by the entire tribe. They broke it up into individual lots of land and gave it to individuals trying to turn us into farmers. The interesting thing on this is most of this highland where you see all these allotments are actually kind of rocky and forested lands. And these yellow lands up here that were ultimately auctioned off is beautiful. It's some of the highest producing dry wheat land in the country. That you'll notice that almost none of that is in trust land. It was all auctioned off to non-Indians in the turn of the last century. So a little bit on Tumānwit. Tumānwit's the word we kind of use for natural law. It's not just traditional ecological knowledge. It's all things. It's how we treat each other. It's how we treat our brothers and sisters in the natural world. It's how we treat each other in government ways. Like even if we're mistreated, we will still treat you well. We were one of the, you know, the Nez Perce next door were the ones that found Lewis and Clark wandering aimlessly through the forest. And, you know, they came down and they came down right by the river and they met the Umatilla. The Cayuse were a little bit, we were mountain people, so they probably didn't experience us. We were up in the mountains a little bit more. But, you know, we still take care of them. And even now, we still do that. I mean, we're, like for COVID right now, Indian Health Services provided a surplus of vaccines. And so now we are, at our last vaccine drive, we are offering free vaccinations to anybody within the 11 counties that are within our ceded territory. And so we're helping still always helping our neighbors, even after all these years. Some traditional ecological knowledge, you know, so I've brought this up before the discussion is so in my academic world, you know, a little bit critical on even the traditional ecological knowledge literature. A lot of the literature kind of treats traditional ecological knowledge as a list of things Indians used to do. You know, fire is traditional ecological knowledge. I mean, all these things that people did was part of that. But one of the things that I've been really pushing in some of my research, and hopefully I get some articles out, is that really traditional ecological knowledge is an ethic and not a list of things to do. When it's treated as an ethic, then everything is traditional ecological knowledge, because it's not about the fire that we used, it's about why and how we used it. So if we used fire in a proper way and the reasons for it, then that is traditional ecological knowledge. And then what happens is if we just say just fire is traditional ecological knowledge, then that knowledge could then be appropriated and taken and be used somewhere else. And so somebody else can discover that knowledge and use it somewhere else. But if the use of fire or the use of any kind of knowledge like that is treated as an ethic or is treated as a way of how and why we do things, then everything becomes traditional ecological knowledge. If we're using a bulldozer properly and with the proper ethics, then that is also traditional ecological knowledge. If we're using Excel spreadsheets to run a balance sheet in order to take care of our forest, then that is also traditional ecological knowledge because we're using it in the right way. So I really want to make sure that we're not just thinking of ecological or TEK as a list of things that Indians used to do. It's just, I don't know, it just kind of burns me a little bit. So it's my little soapbox, and I'm happy to discuss that with anyone who wishes to do so. Little examples on this, and it is, I mean, like the use of fire in the Pacific Northwest, and this is my example. for the Pacific Northwest is, 12, 15,000 years ago, there was an ice sheet. This is all tundra, There was an ice sheet, if I looked out the window, there would have been a mile-high wall of ice, 20,000 years ago. There was no forest here. And so as soon as there was dry land, then there were Indians here. So we've been here as long as the forest. There is no such thing as a non-anthropomorphic forest in the Pacific Northwest, in most of the Northern Hemisphere. All of it's anthropomorphic. So I'm also very critical of wilderness areas. And there's this knowledge kind of thought that if we just remove humans from the system, then it'll just repair itself and take care of itself. And that's actually not true. The health and the vitality of the forest in the Pacific Northwest required human intervention. It actually requires it. And so to actually remove ourselves from it in the forest is actually detrimental to the forest in some ways. So the utilization of forest, so this is an unhindered forest. It's not, nothing's been done with it and just let it go. And this is what a forest ends up looking like in the same species. So these are Doug firs, and they become tangled. We call it a dog hair forest. And then these all die and dry up. And then they're so tight that the trees can't even fall over when they die. So you just end up with an entire forest full of matchsticks that ladders forest fires up into the canopy. Whereas these this forest is the same species and has ground floor burns and then has open aerated areas. You have a lot of biodiversity and different plants growing in there. And then it's also very, very difficult for fire to ladder up into the canopy. So then you don't get those catastrophic fires. Yep, humans are the integral and natural part of the American landscape. So I'll go real quickly. I know we're running on time. So some of the modern things that we're doing here at the tribe is in 1974, 72, 74, I think is when the enabling legislation in the state of Oregon for planning happened. And our leadership at the time realized that we also needed to become, kind of also start planning. We are not part of the state land use and land use program. So we independently created our own comprehensive plan in 1976, right after the state did. We updated that in 96 because a lot of things happened between those 20 years. And then we updated it again in 2010. We just did an update in 2018, and then it's due for, we're actually in the 2020 is a reporting year. So we're on the comp plan for our benchmarks. So we're getting ready to collect all those and benchmarks and start reporting out for 2020. Some of the elements that we have in our comprehensive plan, most of them are quite, they're common across comp plans across the country. Economic development, workforce development, housing, health and human services, community facilities, transportation, public safety, energy. The ones that are different is land-based restoration, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Cultural heritage, treaty rights protection. So there are some things that are a little bit different that we do make sure that we spend a lot of time focusing on as an organization. We have land use and permitting. So we have our own land development code and then our land protection planning commission. So we do everything, zoning, lot splits, conditional uses. We do all the things that normal planning or offices do. One thing that's different though about a land development code, and not to put wet towels on any new planners going out of the field, but a lot of land development code is actually used as an economic device to kind of drive or develop tax bases within communities. No one will ever say that out loud generally, but that's often the case. Is we need a little bit more taxes, so let's raise everybody from industrial 1 to industrial 2, and suddenly you have a whole bunch of more tax revenue coming in because everyone's assessments have increased. But the land protection code, so we don't necessarily have a tax base here on the reservation because it's trust lands, and that's another lecture series. But we actually interpret the land development code rather as the rights of individuals to do things on their lands. We actually treat it as a way to protect the land when development happens on it. So it does all the same things. It approves density, it approves, denotes setbacks, it denotes all those other things. But what it does, about how we interpret it, is making sure that when we do those actions on the land, that the land is still being protected. So otherwise it looks very, standard Euclidean type land development code. But we just interpret it as a way of protecting the land rather than protecting the rights of individuals building on the land as a paramount principle. The future of the reservation, this is some things that we're doing. The land-based restoration is one of our most active comprehensive plan elements. So we have a land acquisition strategy to actually start acquiring those lands. So that checkerboarding, we focus a lot of time, like anytime that land comes up for sale, we make sure we are up for auction because of non-tax payment. We really try to make sure we're there at the forefront to purchase those lands if at all possible. And then we also have our inheritance code, which is, so what ends up happening often is that tribal members would pass away and then their children were not enrollable for whatever reason, usually for blood quantum. And so then that land would slowly go out of trust lands through inheritance, or would go to other Indians and other reservations. And so our inheritance code actually protects that. So if there's no qualified tribal member here locally that can inherit the land, then the tribe has an opportunity to come in and then purchase that land as a right of first refusal in order to be able to restore it within tribal trust property. And that's part of and this is the CTR, and this is just the last 2 years of articles within the Confederated Umatilla Journal that I just took off the front page. I didn't even go into the, for all the other things that we're doing. But this one down here, the C2IR to receive more money to buy back land, that is actually part of the Cobell land settlement, which is, that's 2 or 3 books, I think, that have probably been written on that. But Cobell was basically a very large class action suit against the federal government for mismanagement of lands. And so the tribe so the federal government had to dump a few $1 billion into that for fixing those problems, as well as buying back fractionated lands and paid out to years of mismanagement on funds to individuals. So this is some of our land-based restoration that we've been doing. So our land-based restoration, this is where we started in 2010 when the comprehensive plan was written. These were our goals for 2015 and 2020 so we started 116,000 acres. We wanted to get to 128. And then in 2020, we wanted to get to 140,000 acres. And so we've met all of our acquisition goals for those two terms by, just barely in 2015, but then by a substantial amount in 2020 because of a couple recent purchases. The reduced fractionated interest through inheritance code and through direct purchasing or gifts, that's those 2 other elements I talked about on our land acquisition strategy. So these are individual parcels that we've actually tried to clean up and purchase. And so they're very complex situations. And so 2015, we did a pretty good number, and we're still working on the numbers for 2020. So I don't quite have those yet. Just real quickly, these are some of the lands we've purchased. There's Wanaka Rainwater, which is a large piece of property in the state of Washington, and then Frenchtown was actually an old French settlement just outside of Walla Walla, and the landowner there gifted that back to the tribe not too long ago. That large piece of property I discussed that took us up to, during this very large piece, is actually a very large chunk of property that's right here, if you can see my cursor. It's just off reservation, but it's called Wheelhouse property. And there's that, and then there's 3 or 4 other properties over here in the Grand Ronde Basin, Catherine Creek. Here they are. Looking Glass, Catherine Creek, and Wheelhouse were the 3 other major additional properties we've purchased or otherwise been gifted. In the future is also, we have a team working on this little survey snafu that happened in 1871. We would love to work on that. It was part of a settlement that we did in the 1940s, and so we don't know what our options are, but we are looking at trying to get some of that back, maybe someday in the future. And then of course, how do we help? I discussed this a little bit before of helping our neighbors. We kind of have this expectation that rising water lifts all boats. And so we do make sure that we coordinate very closely with our neighbors on all sorts of things. In fact, I just had a 2-hour phone call yesterday on, a mutual project with the city of Pendleton on large trails projects and potentially a sports complex and a few other things. Kayak public transit, I didn't even touch base on that. That is in my office, and that is We are the largest public transportation provider in Eastern Oregon. We go to 4 counties in Northeastern Oregon and Southeastern Washington. We go to 18 communities and towns and cities and have about 100,000 riders per year. And that's completely owned and operated by the tribe. Only about 8% of our miles are actually on reservation, and about 10% of the ridership is actually tribal members. The rest of it is all regional passengers. So our primary mission is to provide free public transit throughout the region, but our underlying goal is that we're also providing free public transit for tribal members to go with it throughout our ceded territories. So we're by doing that, we're winning both ways. We're helping our neighbors, we're helping our economy, we're helping our group, but then we're also having another win out of it by providing transportation for the tribes. You know, by having all those other riders on the buses, we're actually getting the grant money in order to be able to provide transportation throughout the ceded territories. So it's a win-win. There's no zero-sum game on that one, and that's what we try to work on everything through our economic development. And I think that's all I have right now. And I flew through that, so sorry for talking so fast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, JD. Some really rich information, touches on a lot of the concepts around quantum and registration that we studied in the class, but also the complexities of land ownership and what that means over time for tribal communities. And then also land management practices. It was really powerful to see those forest photos that you showed us with the fire management techniques and how useful that can be. So I want to open it up for our discussion. We actually have some prepared questions that students in the class prepared. Alex and Pedro, I'm going to turn it over to you to start. And then there's some wonderful questions already in the chat, and maybe people can either raise hands or post their questions in the chat. So thank you so much to all of the presenters. Alex, Pedro, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much for these presentations. It was so great to listen to. So Pedro and I kind of went through the readings that were provided before the presentations, and we kind of pulled out some discussion questions that might kind of facilitate discussion on some of the points that you made. One was that biocultural restoration approaches tend to require long timelines of research. And so often the artificial and potentially oppressive construct of urgency can enter in conflict with this characteristic. So how can we manage this tension in considering that it's a long timeline and we have to, there's also this sense of immediacy?
Chucky, do you want to respond?
Yes, I didn't know if it was an open question, but yeah, I was ready.
Sounds like it's for anyone.
Okay, the way we looked at it, and I mean, in my discussion, I did say that we looked at the 3 basic problems that exist, and then we tried to win over the public by actually attacking the bay first, and instead of turning off the faucet at the lake, the bay gave us a place where we could actually show that we were doing some good. And I mean, it was a matter of choice. It was a matter of choosing the spot that gave the best buck for the community, because without that support, you can't go anywhere. And you cannot fix a problem that took 400 years to create in 10 or 20 years.
Okay, or JD, do either of you want to comment on that as well, JD?
Yeah, I was trying to think I don't know if there's a short answer to that. Because it's about mutual cooperation between, there are short-term needs. There is an immediacy in a lot of things. And so we can't necessarily, it's not really a tension in the sense that we do either short-term things or long-term things. We have to do both. And so there are last year we had a 500-year flood. regardless of climate change that may or may not have caused it, which is a long-term thing, we had an immediate issue with the 500-year flood, and we had a house floating down the middle of the river. So it's not like we can do one or the other, or that we have to do one or the other. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing in the short term and even midterm is working towards the long term. In some ways, it's also a different conceptualization of time. Native people and anybody before the advent of the Industrial Revolution actually thought of time cyclically. So if we don't get it this time, we'll get it around the next time kind of mentality. And now if things are cyclical, then there is no longer a long term and short term. There's always the things that are coming up next. And so I don't know. I guess maybe it's just making sure that you're looking at both of those and not just, exploiting something now for the detriment of later. I don't know if I helped answer that at all, but I don't know. I guess I just don't see much of as much of a conflict as I might feel.
All right, Sanjana, I see that you have a really nice question in the chat as well. Do you want to ask that? Maybe what we could do is ask the audience members to introduce yourself before you ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the reminder. I'm Sanjana. I'm a technical associate with the Sensible City Lab here in the Department of Urban Studies at MIT. And so while watching, all of your presentations, really, I just had this kind of recurring question come up of, or more of a statement meets query, I guess, about kind of the rediscovery, quote unquote, about Indigenous knowledge practices, like regenerative agriculture or like sustainable land management, for example. So, these points are kind of becoming more integrated into, I guess, mainstream environmental conversations, for lack of a better term. And I'm just kind of wondering if you have any perspectives on how non-native people who are working in these areas, maybe with good intentions, are unintentionally just, not actually honoring or giving credit to the people who have been working on these systems for centuries and developing them and iterating them and customizing them to kind of the lands that they're suited on. So how do you think maybe that people working in these areas can kind of make sure to honor the people who develop these systems in the first place?
I'll talk about that real quickly. So historically, we have this concept called the Great Promise, and there's a whole story behind the Great Promise. But basically, the Great Promise was that as long as we're taking care of the natural world, and the natural world will take care of us. We weren't just these recipients of this bountiful cornucopia of the natural world, and we had to work at it. We worked hard on the landscape and managed the landscape. And our agricultural practices are much longer term, which is why a lot of the Western people, when they came out here, didn't recognize it as agriculture, because our crop rotations are 70 years instead of 7 months. The thing is that our challenge is that, we, in that 6.5 million acres we had in landscape, we now only have 3,000 tribal members. But we still have so we lost 95, 98% of our population. So there were 300 or 400 or 500,000 of us in our ceded territories, before 1500. So the notion that we can now take care of that land is very difficult. There's only 3,000 of us yet. So the hardest thing we have to do, and this is part of that, it's even part of our goals is actually doing out this outreach, is if we can't take care of the land, then how do we transmit that ethic and that knowledge to other people who can? And that knowledge will change and grow. And that's the other issue that I have about tech being this list of things that Indians used to do, is because it is that, but it's also an ethic. If we can transmit that ethic to other people, then it doesn't really belong to us in the first place. It belongs to the world, and it belongs to the people there. And so personally, if somebody takes that knowledge and uses it in a good way, awesome. I don't even want the credit for that. I don't need the credit. I'm not going to hold on to something to the detriment of the land just to maintain the ownership of it. I don't see that as benefiting the things that needs to be occurring in the first place. So, ownership of knowledge is, I get that, and I totally understand that. And, if somebody wants to thank us for preserving that knowledge, awesome. But just take care of the land in a way that needs to be taken care of. That's what's important.
And Kāʻeo, did you want to comment on that? I think there was some really nice similarities to what you had presented about treating the broader population as learners in the work that you showed.
Sure. It's a great question, actually. I mean, there's all the obvious things that are being done around starting to include traditional practitioners on research papers, acknowledgements, and all those little things. I think what's going through my mind with that question is as I mentioned, the deep traditional knowledge of a place, at least, is not something you can drop in and drop out. It comes from, as JD mentioned, the concept of time, a continuum going back many generations and going forward. So you can get snippets of knowledge, of a practice and so forth, working on the short time frames that we tend to work on in Western science and planning. But in my mind, certain specific knowledges and practices of unique places can really only be deepened if you have a sustained relationship with that place. And that's just my opinion. So I think there's more, universal sets of values and principles that are more easily shared and should be shared across peoples and cultures and so forth, and experiences and backgrounds. And then I think there's more unique knowledge practices that I think are more specific to place, and that again, relationships again, two-legged relationships or relationships with those specific waters and so on and so forth, that can really only come. And even for me, I mean, Hawaii is not a big place, but I wouldn't pretend to be an expert. Though I'm, as a Western trained, as an engineer or hydrologist, I'm considered an expert in water, but I would not pretend where, say, Ku, for instance, and where they live. I would defer to folks of that place, because I just know how unique the knowledge sets of places and personalities of land and Aina can be. So for me, it's kind of a little bit more dependent on broader concepts and ethics and values and responsibility that I think is more easily shared and should be shared and translatable. But I think when you get down to more specifics of a place and those knowledges, I think not as easy. And how do we honor those places? And I actually don't think you can get that kind of deep knowledge unless you have a sustained relationship to things.
Thank you. Yeah, no, the relationship with time and different conceptions of time seems really critical to understanding the different modes of knowledge, whether we think about that as a system or as an ethic. I think that all of the speakers have addressed that question. Peter, I see that you also had a really nice question in the chat. Can I turn it over to you to ask that question?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Janelle, and thank you all the speakers. Wonderful program. I'm Peter Crawley, the project director of a kind of a land transfer to Native folks down in the Kingston, Massachusetts area called Muddy Pond, and we're working with the Native Land Conservancy, a group started by the Mashpee Wampanoag, and includes all the Wampanoag tribes more currently. So my question basically asks, what are some of the indigenous kind of governance and land use concepts? For example, communal ownership of land versus individual ownership of land. What are some of the other basic concepts that might be useful for current conservation initiatives, just to shift the thinking at a fundamental level, and could be implemented with some more modern conservation initiatives. I love the inheritance ordinance, for instance, just a communal right of first refusal on certain types of land transactions, things like that. So I wondered what the speakers, if they had any other ideas around that.
It's difficult for, at least here in the Umatilla Reservation, because we were allotted. And so there are other reservations that were not allotted, like Warm Springs and other places that were not allotted. And by allotted, I mean broken up and then given, 40 acres for women and 80 acres for men and 160 acres for headmen. So there was, it's an interesting phenomenon here in the reservation, though, is that in many ways, a lot of our tribal people are fairly westernized in land ownership. Like, that's their land. They want their own 5 acres out in the country. They don't want to live in a village kind of thing. There's because for whatever reason, there's some westernization that's occurred in land ownership concepts. And one of the things that's interesting is like, so that inheritance code is actually kind of controversial, because what happens is this land becomes fractionated. One person was allotted that land back in 1888. There's now 200 descendants that are now part owners of these lands, or, we have everything from one, we on the entire reservation, we only have about 5 pieces of property that are like sole owner by an individual Indian. The rest of the lands are all fractionated from 2 to 20, the vast majority of them. And then we have a handful of properties that are fractionated up to 200 people or 150 people. So, but when that inheritance code comes in, so you have a fractionated piece of property, say it's 100 acres, and this one person owns 1% of that, then that 1% is now being inherited. It cannot be inherited by any qualified tribal member, so then it gets bought by the reservation. When the reservation purchases it, now that undivided interest then becomes tribal trust, which is different CFRs, which means that entire piece of property is now locked up and cannot be done anything with it. It's very, very difficult to do anything with that. So then, even if somebody else owns 95% of it, and then 1% of it is owned by the tribe, they cannot build a house on it, they can't subdivide it, they can't do anything with it. So the tribal trust process is very, very difficult and very, very complex. And so people actually kind of freak out when they find out that a piece of their property is actually being purchased by the reservation, because it locks it up and they can't do anything with it. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but the notion of it sounds really good, but the actual practice of it actually is very, very complex and difficult.
I'll throw something on the table. I think for traditionally, and it's probably varies by island and district, but I know here in where I live with our agricultural systems, and before fee ownership, the sense of productivity that if you're being productive, if you're being productive in growing whatever products and so forth, you continue to be allowed to be on that property and be given more. If yours was overgrown with weeds and nothing was happening, the chief or so forth overseeing might take it away from you and give it to somebody else who can be more productive. And I think it's interesting actually. I have a conversation next week with some others of how do we, aside from normal, more Western concepts of fee ownership or leases or licenses, are there ways we can give Native Hawaiian families opportunity to access land for more subsistence type activities, with the intent that in some ways it's a win-win, because it costs us money to manage lands and to bear those costs, and so it's a cost of reduction on one end, and then giving other people a chance to make those lands productive and make them fat again, basically with food. So we are actually considering, like, what would that look like? I mean, again, being tied up in Western law does complicate things, but are there ways we can, basically say, okay, if you show us what you can do, and if you can be productive, you can stay here and have some kind of some form of agreement that's not fee ownership. And if you do well, we'll give you more and expand on that. And if not, then you can give it to somebody else. So I don't know if that makes any sense. But we are trying to, in the midst of the Western confines of land law, trying to find ways that maybe are more connected to how maybe things are done traditionally.
Mhm. We're almost out of time, but Chucky, I want to give the last word to you.
Okay, first of all, coming from the East Coast and Cape Cod, we don't see land as like out in the West Coast, and we don't see that kind of acreage. Mashpee was one of the first reservations formed by one of the only reservations formed by the Crown. And at that time we had 60 square miles. It was dedicated, supposed to be dedicated to us forever. Okay, now the Europeans never understood what the word forever meant. So I mean, that changed into, okay, the people came in, the overseers, and took that land and decided on their own that the Indians didn't have any use for it because they were just leaving it alone. They weren't developing it into anything. So that land immediately got cut down to around, oh goodness. That land went from 60 square miles to 20 square miles. Okay, and then allotment came along. And families were allotted properties, and those properties soon got out of the hands of the families because they took away the reservation against the vote of the tribe, and then took away the land by taxing the land until the Indians that didn't have the ability of the education to be able to pay money for a job that lived off the land. And so the lands became subject to tax title, and unfortunately, even some of our own people took advantage of those situations. So when I look at land conservation as such, and I am working with the kids on the Muddy Pond property and talking to them about that. When I see an opportunity that we can put common land that everyone can use, and that those people can all enjoy that land together. I mean, I live on a half acre of land, okay? But my land is open to everybody. And my land will always be open to every tribal member. If they need to come here, they need a minute, well, okay, here you go, come on. But that's a hard, I mean, I look at tribes with hundreds of thousands of acres and say, okay, you guys should be able to figure that out and share in it. So, I mean, I haven't got the understanding, I guess, to even think in them kind of numbers.
All right. Well, I want to thank all three of you so much for joining us and for this really insightful discussion. We'll give you a virtual hand, hands clapping. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this, the practitioner knowledge, your tremendous experience and insight, and really opening up the complexity of this space, which we're exploring in the class. There are not many simple solutions to the challenges that we're examining, but the students have learned so much working with you. And I know that Duarte, you've helped a lot with the Hawaii students, and then Chucky, you've been so instrumental to the team with, I know Leslie was on the call earlier as well. Thank you so much. And then Peter, you're involved as well with the Muddy Pond. The students have really enjoyed working on that project. So this is the last of our panel presentations. If you've enjoyed this and you've missed any of them, we have the sessions recorded. Those will be on the DUSP website. You can contact Osamu to get access to any of the recordings if you've missed a session. And our final set of presentations will actually be the students who are presenting the projects. They've worked on all teams, on all term. Those will be May 13th. So we'll send out at the same time we'll send out details for those presentations and hope that those of you who have joined for our panels will be able to join and see what the students have accomplished. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. I'll let everyone sign off. And if the students want, I know Osamu is going to be in his office hour for any additional questions for the next hour. So you can also hang on if there's any additional thoughts or questions. So thank you so much again, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay, I'm gonna go hop over to my office hours.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for wrapping that up, Janelle.